Carl.
Imagine finding you here today, Michael.
Funny to bump into you in this
Crazy
virtual room that we pre-scheduled for ourselves. You can't have chance encounters anymore in this virtual world. It just doesn't work.
It's a little bit like when I call my mom. For some reason, when I call my mom, she answers the phone like she'll say hello, and I'll say hello, and she goes, "Oh, Carl," and I'm like, "I'm on your caller ID." Like, yeah. You knew it was me. So yeah, we don't know more of those surprises. Nope.
Yeah. It's just a strange side effect of the modern world, I guess.
For sure. What's on your mind today, Michael?
So we did this episode, a couple of weeks ago around, as I like to think of it, basically the maximizing versus satisficing conversation, right? Like, and how you help all those clients that are just maximize more, and can sometimes get so stuck on that they can't even enjoy the wealth they've created, right? Like we get stuck in our frugal saver habits that we can't enjoy the money that we've frugally saved, all those challenges that crop up with clients. And we had a couple of questions or comments that came in from advisors that to me were basically like the same thing applied to us as advisors, right? There's the old saying of business: if you're not growing, you're dying. Our industry puts like growth on a pedestal, grow, revenue always has to be moving up and to the right for lots of different reasons. But the comments that started coming in were a lot of advisors say, like, look, at the end of the day, like I've been doing this for a good amount of time. I'm 10 or 20 years in the business. So I guess they're probably in their 30s and 40s. I've got a good client base. I make some pretty good money. I've had my clients for a while, which means I don't even actually work a ton of hours anymore. So basically, I make really good money. I've gotten to a point where I don't have to work that hard. I could really cruise from here and make good money and be able to retire and everything's fine. And I don't know what to do because basically everything the industry says you're not allowed to stop. Like you always have to grow, because if you're not growing, you're dying. And like, I don't want to be dying because that sounds bad, but I don't really feel a need to grow. And it's like, what do I do? Like, what do you do when you've actually gotten to a good place with the business, but you're supposed to keep growing, but you don't actually need to keep growing, but you're supposed to keep growing, but you don't actually need to keep growing?
This is a great subject and timely for me just because I struggle with the same thing. And I have thought a lot about it. So like, I have no idea, but I've thought a lot about it. And so this is another one of those moments where I think I get to declare that I reserve the right to be wrong about everything I'm going to say. And I'm often wrong and never in doubt. And this is one of those subjects that I think like, yeah, it's funny. I got a very similar, I got some of the emails around that too. And one of them I'm thinking of right now is somebody who said, and I'm just trying to make sure I anonymize enough. So an advisor, a successful advisor who said, and these are the funny emails, Mike. Like I get these are the quiet in the corner of the conference, right? Like in the hallway, like, is anyone around emails? Like, hey, I don't know what to do. My business is super successful. And the very thing that made it successful has resulted in me really not having much of a life, right? Like I've forgotten what I was interested in. This particular email, he had just broken off a long-standing engagement.
Meaning like significant other engagement, not like
exactly.
Engagement.
And was struggling with what to do. Sorry, I'm sorry, people. I know I'm going to get emails about that. I forgot to turn the thing off. It was ringing. I had to reach up and turn off the phone. Sorry about that. So long-standing engagement, and is essentially saying it was a wake-up call, right? Like I don't need to grow anymore, but yet here I am still working. And so the question was like, what do I do? you know, and to me, it's so obvious from the outside. And I can say this with deep empathy because I can't solve it for myself. I can see it in other people, but it's like, get a life. You know what I mean? Find some other things that we're interested in. Realize that that myth, we are not, like, it's settled science at this point. The thing we will regret on our deathbeds is the stuff that we didn't do, right? With the people and the interests that we have. We won't regret the time. We know it's cliche at this point. We're not going to regret the time, that the fact that we didn't spend more time at the office. We're not going to regret the money we spent. We're not going to regret the things we tried and they didn't work. We're going to regret the things we didn't do, we didn't try. And so we know all that, and yet, you know, I think Andy Grove is largely to blame for this, right? Only the paranoid survive. That book of his.
Well, and I feel like it has gotten magnified in our industry that, look, I get the whole if you're not growing, you're dying philosophy, but you know, we do have a tendency in this industry, I think in particular, to imply or sometimes outright say like the best advisors have the biggest AUM and the biggest growth rates, right? I mean, that's literally what we put in the recognition list. Like, nobody does a list for the highest income solo practices who work the least hours to make $500,000.
Right.
We only have the lists of the people who got 37% growth rates and managed to get to $1 billion the fastest. So just we put that up on a pedestal, and I know why we put that up on a pedestal. We do it because the platforms, the broker dealers, the custodians only make money if we grow. Like, we're their market. We haven't added to the net count of advisors for 20 years. It's been stagnant or declining. So they literally only make more money if we grow. So they sponsor contests where they celebrate the growthiest of us so that we all outcompete each other to be the growthiest. So some weird conflicts within our industry, but like, I do feel like we have gotten maybe overly fixated on growth, or maybe overly fixated on the revenue. I mean, we even saw this. So we did a recent study on well-being. Well, we did a study last year on well-being. We're doing another one this year. The study we did last year on well-being, one of the most striking results that we had out of the research is, if you just look at like advisor sort of self-reported well-being, like our satisfaction with life, how often we have positive feelings, how often we have negative feelings, there is a very clear and direct relationship that the more profitable our practice is, like the more take-home income we have, the better we feel about our practices. There is sort of a like money buys happiness thing, but it's only a relationship between take-home income and well-being. There's not only really no relationship between revenue and well-being. If your firm actually gets large enough, it is a very clearly negative relationship. Like for every $100 million you add after the first $100 million, we see a like direct linear relationship that you're less happy.
Down,
like negative, down and down and to the right. Like when the revenue goes up and to the right, the happiness goes down and to the right. I think it's entirely driven by most of us at the end of the day get into this to work with clients and help people. And when you start growing a business of a certain size, your job is not to serve clients and help people. Your job is to manage people and grow a team and do a whole bunch of management-y, business-y stuff that just for most of us is not why we got into this in the first place. I mean, if you keep growing and you add clients, you will eventually get to this crossover point, but it's not why most of us did it in the first place. Yeah. To me, just the starting point at the most basic level is if you just start thinking about how do I grow my income and not my revenue, and you start optimizing for that instead, which means you may get more focused on fewer clients that are a better fit and how to serve them well. Because if you just add clients and then add staff to serve them, you may not even take home any more money because you've got to hire more staff to serve more clients. If you just start like just changing up the metric a little, maybe it's not about grow the revenue and the number of clients. Maybe it's just about better clients you can serve better in a more premium fashion, and possibly even have fewer of them and get a little bit of your time back as well. I mean, what we see literally in the data is that's what produces advisors who actually sort of empirically say they're happier and have better well-being, not just the grow more.
Yeah. So, and I think that's like, to me, that's an interesting first step, is like, okay, let's opt. And I remember somebody telling me that 22 years ago, and they would point out, in fact, I remember I was on a chairlift not far from the office. I can look out the window and see it. And there was I'll spare the name of the firm, but everybody would know the name of this firm. Advisor. I didn't know them. I was skiing by myself. I got in the singles line. That I happened to get on the chairlift with an advisor, and they said to me, and this was when I had a firm that had like, I don't know what let's just not even use numbers, because everybody gets fixated on the numbers, but some number that was like cute lifestyle business, right? And I said, like, what do you do? And the person was like, yeah, I work here. And it was like 2 initials and giant private wealth management investment bank, maybe. And they said, well, how much do you, they asked the question, how much do you manage? What's your assets under management? And I said the number, and he literally said like, oh, so you run a cute lifestyle business. And normally I let that go. But this time I was like, I took a long pause and I said, hey, let me just be clear about something. Because I'd already found out where he lived and it was not here. I was like, let me just be clear about something. You're on vacation. This is just Tuesday for me. And I normally just let it go, but I was like, I couldn't. So I think, and somebody after that, I was telling somebody that experience, they were like, yeah, optimizing for income, who cares how much you manage? So that's step one. But I think even better would be like, next step would be like, optimize for enough.
Well,
what is that? Like,
I mean, it reminds me.
Let me just put a pin in something before you jump in. Like, one thing, let's not forget, like, okay, let's pretend like you get there and you say, I've got space. What do you then do? Because that's where I think we were really pointing at in this conversation.
Well, I was going to say, it reminds me of, so one of the early podcast episodes we had for Financial Advisor Success, episode 7 was Matthew Jarvis. And so Matthew still has this wonderful quote unquote lifestyle practice, $1 million of revenue, 50+% profit margin. He had enough. And so Matthew was optimizing the number of days off that he took, like the number of work days that he didn't work. And like literally that was his KPI dashboard metric. He's like, I want to make the same amount of income, but try to make my vacation days go up and to the right every year. Like that was his growth metric. So all of his focus in the business was not about how do we get more of clients, or even more of revenue, or even more of income. It was, how do I get more vacation days within the framework that I've got? And that's the thing that he was business solving for. And I think at the time he was at something like 80 business days a year that he was taking off. And now he's over 100 because he's continued to optimize for that in the years since. And so to me, it's this interesting framework that, as the saying goes, like what gets measured gets managed.
Yeah, I like that.
Which is when you think about a different metric, like a completely different metric, days off. I actually knew an advisor that did this. Basically, his metric was the number of volunteer hours at his kid's school in the PTA system. And like, that was his thing. And everything was built around how could he free up more hours of PTA service. He was doing hundreds of hours in his kid's school because that's what he wanted to do. But it wasn't just a like, hey, it would be neat to do this. Because we're, at least some of us, we're kind of math nerds about how we do this. Like, he measured it, he quantified it, he had a tracking statistic for it.
Yeah.
And he optimized for it. Because like that's what we do. We plan and execute, set a goal, achieve the goal, set a goal and achieve the goal. So but they to me, the interesting story is like they found different metrics.
Right. I love the idea of just like playing a different game, competing at a different thing. So let's, which is awesome, right? So now let's pretend, because the comment that I get that I'm more interested in, concerned isn't the right word, but more interested in, and I think you got some of this too, is let's pretend like you managed to do that. So you essentially say, yeah, like I've had 2 of these lately. I have set everything up in the business so I can take Fridays off. But I'm not taking Fridays off because I don't know what to do. Right? Like, and so what do you do then? Because that's like, I'm in a similar situation right now where I've set the business up, the team is amazing, and I'm finding these big chunks of space, which was the plan because I wanted it for creative time. And I'm finding instead of even like some rest or creative time, I'm filling it with unnecessary stuff. And I'm having the conversation lately of like, why am I doing that? So I think what's interesting is if you set it up so that you can take Friday off, or you're like Matthew, like I'm going to take a week a month, or I'm going to take a week a quarter. I know people who've done that. All the systems get set up. You win, and then you find yourself like, and you come I love the idea of like you come face to face with yourself. Well, what do you do then? Right? Like how do you solve that problem?
It reminds me of the conversation just even with clients, like,
yep.
Mr. Richards, you come in, I'm so excited to work with you on your plan for retirement. So tell me about your retirement goals. Like someone like go do my goals-based planning thing. I ask you like, tell me about your retirement goals, which for anybody who's like tried that usually goes very badly in a client conference. Like people are like, I have no idea. Like I don't
know. Like so let's keep doing it. Let's keep asking them. Let's do it.
I don't know. I guess like we would have a beach house. Like, cool. Is there a reason you want a beach house? Like, yeah, basically usually comes down to like I saw it in a movie, a commercial, or at some point in my early childhood, someone I admired had a beach house that seemed really cool. So I've always thought it would be cool if I had one as well. But I have no actual idea if that's meaningful, valuable, if I'll enjoy it. It just seems like a nice idea. Like we literally, like most clients don't even know what their goals are. They can't articulate their goals. At best, they're plucking goals out of thin air, or they're just projecting their current life ever so slightly modified. Just like we don't know what we don't know. We've never lived the life we haven't lived. I've long griped about that in the client context, and frankly, I think just to me, that's just reinforced. Like we literally have the same problem ourselves. Like tell me about your goals when you make enough income that you don't need to work so hard in your practice. And most of us have no answer to that question. Like tell me about your goals when you're making enough income in your practice that you don't need to keep growing it anymore.
And right, like it only gets harder and more pronounced the longer you go.
Yep.
Because I mean, look, let's just be, and again, nobody is going to admit this. These are these quiet conversations that we have when nobody's looking. And these, I mean, I get my inbox, the Society of Advice inbox is full of these stories because apparently people feel like I care. And I do.
I was saying you do, right?
And I do deeply, actually. Like I care about this more than anything else we could talk about. Is like our own interpersonal struggle. So there's now these emails with like, and so I know half of you listening, or it's probably true actually, half of you listening are like, I don't know what you're going on about. That's amazing. That means you don't. But if you have wondered yourself, like, look, I worked so hard while the kids were young. They're all teenagers, got purple hair and nose rings. They don't want to talk to me. Like nothing wrong with purple hair and nose rings. Like, or I don't have any hobbies. Or to be honest, at work, I was just having this conversation with an advisor the other day. He's like, Carl, at work, I get validation. At home, I don't. Right? Like, I don't even know how to be. I don't even know how to be at home. Right. And so if you think you're alone, like that's every single hardworking man or woman in history has had to sort out. What you do there is you either go do something crazy. We have a word for it. a midlife crisis,
I was gonna say,
right? Like you go do something crazy. It's so common. We have a cliche, right? Like you either do, or you say, darn it, I'm going to rebuild this situation. And then what do? You do it the same way you do it with a client. Like, let's place a small bet. Hey, what if you just took one of those kids to lunch every Friday and didn't make a thing? Just like, hey, let's go grab a taco. Right? What if you just decided that you like, remember that interest you had in off-road jeeping? I don't know, like pickleball, ping pong, like what if you just place a small bet? And then it comes down to what you and I talk about all the time. It's like, well, you just practice one little step at a time, or you give up and have an affair and buy a Ferrari. It doesn't have to be that dramatic, but I'm just trying to be cliche about it, like in the movies, right?
Yeah, I hear you on the really just be incremental and try something. I do feel like there's an added challenge for a lot of us in the advice business that just advisors tend to be very goal oriented.
Right.
We've actually like literally seen that in some of the research that we've done. Like just if you measure, there's some psychological traits around sort of goal orientation and focus to future. If you measure that, the average advisor just scores off the charts of that relative to the average human being. Like from a human psychology end, financial advisors are basically like goal setting, goal achieving machines who like to teach other people how to do the same goal setting, goal achieving thing that we love doing for ourselves, which is why we love like goals based planning and setting goals. And I'm going to help optimize you on your path to your goal. Like it's just how a lot of us are wired. And like I think that's great.
I'm in the wrong business.
It's a great, awesome thing. But like it means we don't do incremental experiments well. I mean, I'll bet for some advisors I've seen the way they unhook themselves from this challenge is like a big new goal in another direction. Like, hey, I've been stuck a little bit too much. Like I'm working too many hours. My health is not great. I know I'm making enough money. I really need to get on better track. I used to work out a lot, but I hardly do it anymore. Next year, I'm going to run a marathon.
Right.
And just like throw like a giant old thing out there. Like I need a really hard to achieve, distant, challenging, I'm going to strive for it goal. And for some of us, like that breaks them out into a new path, a new trajectory. Like that gets them out of the rut, out of the stuck, out of the like, if I'm not growing, I'm dying. Cause like you are growing. It's just, you're not growing your practice anymore. You're growing your marathon thing. You're growing your like martial arts belts, whatever else it is. For a lot of people I've seen, it gets very physical, but like just, we set the big new goal so that we have a goal to work towards. Got to have a goal to be striving for. Just like, it's not a goal that has to do with more revenue or even more income or even anything in the advisory business. And part of the realization is saying like, your business is at a point where you can set a goal that's a whole other thing in another direction, have that be what occupies your incremental time and energy. You're going to walk away from your practice and not serve your clients. Like it takes a certain amount of energy to do that. It takes a certain amount of additional energy to do the next thing. And the next thing doesn't have to be the more clients direction. It can be the next thing.
Yeah, I struggle with that because I'm that way too. I'm like all in or not. And I like the exact number of cookies that I can't eat is 1, right? Like I can eat 0 or I can eat 5,000. But I had this conversation. We had James Clear on as a guest at the Society of Advice thing, and I used it as a personal therapy session, and we talked specifically about incremental versus big all-in goals, and it's really interesting how often we have like flare out and burnout, and when we do these big things, like what really. And I'm finding this to be true is like just setting up like, Atomic Habits is a magic book. Like I was like, really seriously, another habits book. And it's actually, and one of the things I think is amazing is just like sort of setting up the world, the people you hang out with, your systems, everything around you to optimize for the thing that you're trying to do now. So let's just return to like, I want to rebuild my family, because that seems to be coming up in the emails that I'm getting. Like, I want to have better relationships at home. I want to have enough, my health, like any of those things. The dilemma with that is the world doesn't care. There's no list. There's no billboard. There's no 40 under 40. Nobody cares. I mean, Lance Armstrong said that in his book after the divorce. He was like, look, at work, everybody cared. Like, Lance has got a whole bunch of other problems, whatever, but like the example still holds. And so somehow we have to get down to this thing that we talked about earlier. Like, what does it mean to have enough? What really brings happiness? And so if you can figure out a way to measure that and make it like a big thing, right? Like, I'm going to take these number of days off, or I'm going to that volunteer hour thing is awesome, right? Like, could you do that? I don't think it works really well with teenagers if they know, but they don't have to know, right? Like,
number of hours I spent with my teenager without my teenager realizing I'm trying to maximize the number of hours I'm spending with him or her.
Yeah, that I'm tracking it. Like, I have reminders to check in with my kids, especially when they're living away. Like, I have a reminder. That seems like, really, you have to have a reminder. Yeah, I care that much that I built a system. So yeah, I think, but that's the way I would do it, is like, but yeah, where are you going to set that goal? Marathon, jujitsu, whatever. Like, maybe that is like, okay, well, go do a small experiment before you go all in. Once you figure out where it is, you're sort of experiment, you're being less strong. Once you figure out where it is, then like, okay, great. My advisor friend, goal-based advisor, dive in. But my point really is like, A, don't feel like you're alone. B, you can do it, right? Like, and I think like, C, like, if we could just get a little more quiet and understand, like, what's the point in the first place? You know, like, we know for sure that none of this stuff is going to bring the happiness that we thought. It's so cliche at this point, but I literally yesterday had another conversation with a friend. She is now, when we first started talking, she was making something like $500,000 a year. It was $500,000 in revenue. It's not an advisor. Close, but not an advisor. $500,000 in revenue. And she was telling me about all the stress and the problems and the things and the arguments and the trouble with $500,000 in revenue. She's now making $8 million in revenue. And it was 3 years. We literally had the exact verbatim conversation
about all of her stresses and unhappiness.
All the things. And like, this time it was the private airport staff, like whatever. But I was like, nothing's changed.
Yeah.
Not one thing has changed. And so I think if you're having those kind of problems, I think it's clear at this point. If you're having those kind of problems, growth and more money and more revenue will not solve those problems.
Yeah, I think the piece I'd leave out there, just as we wrap up. So whether you're at this wall, or even including those who maybe aren't there yet and are hearing this and like, first world problems, like I wish I made so much money I didn't know what to do with more money. But I think it's relevant for anyone out there. Just sit down, sit down and think about the question, like, what are your goals when you make enough in your practice that you don't need it to grow anymore? And just spend some time with that question. Like, what are your goals when you make enough in your practice that you don't need it to grow anymore? So to each their own, like, take those Fridays off that you've been trying to figure out what to do to take off and spend some time with that question, or take a weekend off, or take a week off and go lock yourself away in a cabin somewhere. I know some people like to get empty space and distance to try to find the vision of what's next. But even if you're not there, and I think frankly, especially if you're not there, it's powerful to think about this question, because if you don't think about the question, what are your goals once you make enough in your practice, you don't need to grow anymore, you're just going to hit that point and keep growing because you haven't set any other goal. And frankly, I think that's why we see the advisors with the biggest revenue tend to have the lowest well-being, because they blew past the goal, didn't realize they blew past the goal, and grew right to the point of unhappiness instead of growing to another direction that would have brought them more happiness.
Yeah. It's, what did Covey say, right? Like, you don't want to spend your entire career climbing a ladder only to realize it's leaning against the wrong wall. Like, this has been going on a long time. And the only real solution is quiet introspection and realizing, like, it's cute that we think we'll be any different than anybody else. In fact, we're probably more, as your research shows, we're probably more prone to the exact same problem than other people. But even if we were just equally as prone, it takes an active engagement, an active effort to prevent this. If left to our own devices, humans will create this problem for themselves.
Yep.
If left to our own advisors will create this problem for themselves squared, right? Like,
yep.
You actively have to prevent it. It's not just something that's going to show up. So I agree. Like, I think the first step is, like, take some time, think about, like, what is it really all for? What is the goal if you didn't have to grow anymore? And get that written down, and then send Michael copies of it on Twittergram or Snap Talk.
Okay. One of those social platforms.
Exactly.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Carl.
Super fun, Michael. Thank you.
Appreciate the conversation.